The bearers of the trusts of God are made manifest unto the peoples of the earth as the exponents of a new cause and the bearers of a new message. Inasmuch as these birds of the celestial throne are all sent down from the heaven of the will of God, and as they all arise to proclaim his irresistible faith, they therefore are regarded as one soul and the same person, for they all drink from the one cup of the love of God, and all partake of the fruit of the same tree of oneness. Baha'u'llah. The foundation underlying all the divine precepts is one reality, and reality is one. Therefore, the foundation of the divine religions is one. But we can see that certain forms and ceremonies have crept in. They are heretical, they are accidental, because they differ. Hence, they cause differences among religions. If we set aside all superstitions and see the reality of the foundation, we shall all agree, because religion is one and not multiple. Abdul Baha.
My goal here is just to be a facilitator more than anything else, to dive into this topic. As I said to Paymana before we started, I really love the questions and answers period of these discussions. So we really learn from each other and dive into these really important topics of the day. So with that, I am going to share my screen. Everyone can see, I hope. Thumbs up. Yeah, we're good. Great. So everybody, before we begin on the topic of one common faith, I think it's important. What is the Baha'i faith? Baha'is are the followers of Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. And his most well-known quote, which encapsulates his entire faith, is the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. As Baha'is, we believe in one God, and we believe that there is one race, the human race, and we believe in one common faith. And today we will focus on this third aspect that I just mentioned, which is on one common faith. And I want to show you this quote from Baha'u'llah, which really says everything about it. So, and it's right here. Baha'u'llah says that which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith. So you could see this concept is truly, as Baha'u'llah says, a remedy of the world. So the question is, okay, that's nice. How is it the remedy of the world? And that's what we're about to get into. Before I do, I just wanted to say a little story, and I'm going to say a lot of stories in this presentation, so bear with me. When we look at religion and faith in general, in the Western world, before 9/11, there was big statements that God is dead and that religion is not needed. We have all we need in the material aspects of life, and we will get into details of that. One of my favorite things that I wanted to mention, which I saw myself, and I don't know even if it's there, if you ever drove into Manhattan, there's several bridges to get into Manhattan. And I forgot which bridge it was, but it's one that has an incredible rock structure next to it. Someone had gone up on this rock structure, which already is pretty incredible feat, and put "God is dead." And he signed it, John. God is dead, John. And someone a few weeks later went up above that quote to make sure he's above it and wrote, "John is dead, God." So I think the world is really looking at this concept of religion and God and how it fits. And I think we need to now start dwelling and understanding it. Before I begin, I want to give you some history here. The Universal House of Justice, which is mentioned in this slide, is the elected international council for the Baha'is around the world. And they have their responsibility as the Universal House of Justice, and they were created by Baha'u'llah himself. They're charged with applying the Baha'i teachings and requirements in an ever-evolving society. And so they're empowered to legislate on matters that are not in the text. So they have written various documents on peace, in this case, one common faith, on these various topics that Baha'u'llah addressed in his writings. And Baha'u'llah, you should know, wrote over 100 volumes. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is an actual one of these documents that the Universal House of Justice have written, entitled One Common Faith. But it's interesting why they wrote this topic. You should know that in April 2002, the Universal House of Justice, being a leader of one of the great religions, wrote an open letter to the world's religious leaders. And it's interesting because this open letter was literally written 7 months after 9/11. And we know that religion played a big part in 9/11 and the fanaticism that it created. So the House of Justice in this letter writes, even though the peoples of the world have begun to see themselves as members of a single human race, organized religion has become a formidable obstacle in the path to peace by giving credibility to fanaticism. So this concept of fanaticism is a very strong component of how humanity views religion. Did you know that #1 book after 9/11, and it was on the New York the sellers list, the New York Times best book to read list after 9/11, was the Quran. And you must ask yourself, why was the Quran the #1 book for people to read? Because people wanted to understand why 19 individuals would do what they did on 9/11. They wanted to understand that faith. I remember watching CNN, and there was an expert teaching about Islam and the Muslim faith and what it meant. So it's amazing how religion all of a sudden took center stage. And again, the questions we have to ask ourselves is why. So in the same letter, the House of Justice, I want to read the second part here. They write, the core message in the letter, they write that the time has come when religious leadership must face honestly and without further evasion the implication of the truth that God is one, and that beyond all diversity of cultural expression and human interpretation, religion is likewise one. So they asked the religious leaders, we need to get together and really delve into this topic of how all the religions are really one, and we're part of the same system of this spiritual enterprise. Unfortunately, many of the religious leaders did not take that call in that open letter from April 2002. So the Universal House of Justice decided to take their own advice. And in March 2005, basically 3 years later, they wrote a document, a publication called One Common Faith. And this document is for the Baha'is to understand for themselves. So we are basically taking our own medicine of what does it mean that religion is one, and how should we look on it. So even as Baha'is, we look at this document of really truly explaining what the concept means. So that's the history behind this document and what we're about to get into. The document is divided up into 13 different sections. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of them. I am going to focus on the first half of it because it really creates the framework of the discussion of One Common Faith. And then I'm going to give some highlights on the second half. And then, of course, I'm hoping, if there's enough interest, I will guide you to the e-learning course that colleagues and I created on the document, One Common Faith. So let's begin, the One Common Faith. So the first part of the document, it really sets the stage. What's the historical aspects? What's the history's turning point? 9/11 could be considered a turning point, but that's not enough. We have to go back even further. And this is, some of these quotes are directly from the document. And as you can see, it really started in the early 20th century. And it says early in the 20th century, a materialistic interpretation of reality had consolidated itself so completely as to become the dominant world faith insofar as the direction of society was concerned. And this is important because materialism in the early 20th century started taking hold, and people before then, if you look at the history of humanity, religion was the core of every society. It was, if you've ever been to Italy, every little village had a piazza with the church right in the middle of it, right? That's an example of how religion drove humanity. And then suddenly in the early 20th century, with the material dimension of society, it started taking a back seat. So much of a back seat that I would say that spirituality became defensive. It took a defensive posture when it came to material aspects of life, right? And then they continue, they say the unhappiness and unrest so prevalent today isn't coming from material development, but rather the fact that the price of this reckless and short-sighted approach to development has been to cut out the spiritual side of things. The dogmatic materialism has simply lopped off a whole chunk of reality. Let's delve into what that means. We're not talking about material development. It's been incredible when you look at the sciences, when you look at health, how we have developed from a material perspective is wonderful, and we should celebrate it. But dogmatic materialism is something very different. And what do I mean by that? Dogmatic materialism, as it says, is it took almost a faith of its own. People's focus has become this material aspect of life. What's interesting, though, that's mostly in the Western cultures, but of course, it's also starting to get into what we call the developing parts of the world. But this materialism has really taken hold. It's from consumerism and all the different aspects that come with consumerism, and the selfishness that comes with materialism. Look at our most important product that all of us have. I have. It's called an iPhone, right? Have you ever thought of that? iPhone? My God, how selfish can we be? Why can't it just be called our phone or your phone? I don't know, something else. But this concept of I is become so prevalent in our society. And to be honest, we don't even think about it. And I want you to remember that in other parts of the world, this is very foreign to them, because they still have the religious aspects of their lives front and center. So I want to stop right here and give you a story of what I experienced myself on how religion is front and center for the rest of the world. I traveled with my beloved mother who passed away. We went to Togo, West Africa, and we went to Lomé, which is the capital, where my aunts live. And we were there, and my aunts said, hey, I want to take you to a village where most of the people there are Baha'is. And the youth there especially, we talk about the unity of the human race as one of the principles of the Baha'i faith, and they are Baha'is. But they say, always you could see they're contemplating what that means, because they've never been 20 minutes outside their village. And we're talking about the unity of the human race, right? So can you come and give a lecture, because you travel so much, you've seen so many people around the world, bring the world to them. They don't have TVs, they don't have internets. This is a story of 20 years ago, by the way. And so it's not like they could see that stuff. So it would be great if you could talk about it. So I did. I went and I gave a talk about the unity of the human race. I talked about different cultures and races and how we need to get together and the importance of it. And I remember a young man, he was about 18, 19 years old, put his hand up. And my aunt immediately told me on my ear, see, he's an example. He's never left the village, right? And I said, yes, how can I help you? And he said to me, this was wonderful, because as you know, I've never left my village, and you brought the world to me. I truly appreciate that. But I have one question for you. And I said, sure, what's the question? And he said, when you get with your friends out there in the world, like you were talking, what do you talk about? And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. Well, we talk about various things. We talk about politics, economics, sports, jobs, weather. He said, that's really wonderful, but what do you really talk about? And I said, well, I said, these are some of the topics. What do you mean? And he said, well, you don't talk about God and purpose of life and spiritual aspects of life. I said, well, yeah, those are important. Is that what you talk about with your friends? And he said, that's all we talk about. All those things. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. And then he asked, well, why don't you? I said, well, let me give you an analogy. In the Western world, we don't start talking with people about God and spirituality and our religion. It's not how we start conversations. And he said, why? And I thought, well, let me give you an analogy. For us, we all have our own baggage. We bring our baggage from our religious dimension, and this person brings their baggage, and it takes us a while to open up our baggage and start talking about our religious aspects of life, right? And this young man looked at me and he said, thank you so much. I know exactly what I have to do tonight. And I said, I didn't tell you to do anything. What are you going to go do tonight? He goes, well, I'm going to pray to God that I never have that baggage, right? So imagine this young man thinking that way, that what is the real purpose of life besides to talk about these spiritual aspects? Materialism had not even touched them. And, materialism in our writings, it says, is like pollution. You can't protect yourself against pollution. It's just there, and you got to make sure you stay away from it. But in this case, with this young man, he really taught me a lesson that materialism could be a peril that we have to watch out for, right? So then there becomes the topics of the disillusionment with the promises of materialism. So then the aspect becomes that, has materialism from the earliest part of this 20th century really helped humanity? Has it made an impact to make a difference in humanity? Again, I'm talking about dogmatic materialism. I'm not talking about material development. That's good. But how materialism has brought our focus. Think about it yourself. How much time do you spend pursuing what you need to pursue to pay the rent, to pay the bills, to pay the car, to pay this, to pay that? That's materialism. And we are in this environment because of materialism has developed it, because we have to be, right? So I'm just going to read this paragraph. The most obvious cause of these reevaluation has been the bankruptcy of the materialist enterprise itself. For well over 100 years, the idea of progress was identified with economic development and with its capacity to motivate and shape social improvement. Those differences of option that existed did not challenge this worldview, but only conceptions as to how its goal might best be attained. And I'm going to read this quote from Baha'u'llah. Witness how the world is being afflicted with a fresh calamity every day, Baha'u'llah warns. And he wrote this in the mid-1800s. Its sickness is approaching the stage of utter hopelessness, inasmuch as the true physician, with a capital P, which we'll talk about, is debarred from administering the remedy, whilst unskilled practitioners are regarded with favor and are accorded full freedom to act, right? So what does that mean? Communism, right? When Baha'u'llah wrote this, communism didn't exist. But now look at what communism did to billions of people and what it promised that it was going to do. That is dogmatic materialism. Even at the expression that it was trying to unify and bring an equity, that was the basis of communism. But look what it did. I'll never forget when the Berlin Wall fell, and eventually in Russia, when things started, the USSR back then started to fall apart. I remember seeing on CNN one gentleman who knew that the American TVs were pointed in the square. He wrote his sign in English, and his sign in English said, "Communism, 70 years on a road to nowhere." Right? And I thought, wow, he really captured of what this is all about. And you know what's fascinating about that? The day after everything fell, no one was a communist anymore. Right? Everyone was part of the Politburo because that's where the power was. But when it fell, they were like, oh, we're not communists. Absolutely not. Right? So it's fascinating how quickly these ideologies fall. And that's why there's a disillusionment with humanity toward them as well. So now why did I bring this topic, or why does the document bring this topic? Because it's now giving you an aspect that people are starting to search. So if materialism isn't going to solve the problems of the world, then I need to start looking at what will solve the problems of the world. You know why? Because they have children, they have families, they have communities and societies they live in, and they want to make it better. And that, what I said, is the same in every society and every group of human beings across the globe, right? So this aspect of search is something that is part of our nature. It is our soul that is seeking to learn and understand what it all means. Why are we here? What is the spiritual aspects of life? Like that African boy from Togo that taught me 20 years ago. So materialism, when you're disillusioned, you start looking for a solution. So that's one. The other thing that helps search is, whoops, I went a little too fast. Yes, here we go. The other thing that is causing people to search is what we call, or what the document itself calls, the globalization, to bring people together. Now we have to be careful because globalization is used purely in economic terms, and the document actually doesn't use the word globalization. It uses the word global integration, right? So this concept of human beings now forced to come together. And the question is, how are they forced, right? They're forced by two means. Travel. Suddenly travel has just exploded in the last 100 years. And unfortunately, sometimes because of migration and people being displaced because of war and famine. So because of all these aspects, humanity has been mixed up. They've been all of a sudden seeing other parts of societies they never imagined to see, right? And of course, technology itself, we know what's happening literally across the world in seconds, right? While when the Titanic sank, it took days before we really found out what happened, right? So, I mean, this aspect of technology and travel has mixed humanity up, and all of a sudden, it's caused a lot of confusion. Let me give you an example. I used to live in Frederick, Maryland, very close to Virginia there. And when I was a kid, going to middle school, high school there, when my parents said, we're going to go to a Chinese restaurant, we were like, we're going to another part of the world, right? Because that's all there was. One Chinese restaurant in all of Frederick, Maryland, right? And that was our connection to a whole different culture, right? Look at yourself today, where you live today. You can eat anything from any culture of the world. The young people today, they don't understand how awesome that is, right? You want Thai? No problem. You want Vietnamese? No problem. Ethiopian? Let's do it. That didn't exist for most of the world. They didn't experience any of that, right? Let me give you another example. I was probably one of the brownest people in my school, along with a few African Americans in high school. So I was strange looking. Now, suddenly everyone, your child that you were teaching a certain way has a friend that's Muslim, Sikh, Asian, from different Buddhist, Hindu, so forth. And now your child is saying, hey, my friend says this, and you have to now address that question as society, as a parent, right? So again, because of the mixing up of society, this global integration, along with the disillusionment with materialism, has caused a search in humanity that's really actually beautiful. At the same time, it could be sad if they don't find what people are longing for. So this last paragraph here that is on this slide really encapsulates what I was trying to say, both on materialism and globalization. Loss of faith in the certainties of materialism and the progressive globalizing of human experience reinforce one another in the longing that they inspire for understanding about the purpose of existence. Basic values are challenged, parochial attachments are surrendered, once unthinkable demands are accepted. It is this universal upheaval, Baha'u'llah explains, for which the scriptures of past religions employed the imagery of the day of resurrection. The shout had been raised, and the people have come forth from their graves, and arising are gazing around them. Beneath all of the dislocation and suffering, the process is essentially a spiritual one. The breeze of the All-Merciful had wafted, and the souls have been quickened in the tombs of their bodies. So this concept of the day of resurrection and the imagery that we had with it is happening right before our eyes. People are searching. People are eager to understand, what is this all about? And I need to find, to really give fulfillment in their spiritual journeys. So to end with this particular section, know that materialism was not the answer, and that global integration has caused humanity to ponder and search. Now, the first thing that many people have gone to is, okay, but we do have religions. Why don't we go to these religions and see if they provide the answers for today? And it's a wonderful thing to do. And let's see what happens with it. So I'm going to read this paragraph because I think it's important to realize that these great religions that we have had, and there are religions that we don't even remember the names for, let alone the prophets for. You don't think the First Nations in Canada or the American Indian or the tribes in South America had their own manifestations and prophets? Of course they did. But we don't even know who they are and what their names are. But we know the great religions were all part of an evolutionary process. And this first paragraph really points that out. Throughout history, the primary agents of spiritual developments have been the great religions. For the majority of the earth's people, the scriptures of each of these systems of belief have served, in Baha'u'llah's words, as the city of God, a source of a knowledge that totally embraces consciousness, one so compelling as to endow the sincere with a new eye, a new ear, a new heart, and a new mind, right? The rational soul does not merely occupy a private sphere, but is an active participant in a social order. So I want to stop right there with that sentence. So now the question becomes, all the great faiths brought something. They're all valid. So when we describe this part, they are the spiritual core. They are eternal. Christ taught about love. That still exists today, and we need it today. None of that disappears. But the social laws, which are transitory, are changing. And that's why religion of the past have a hard time dealing with modernity. They have a hard time dealing successfully with how to guide their adherents in the modern age. Doesn't make those religions wrong. It's just time to move on to the next spiritual aspect of life. These are big statements, but they're not new. Christ came to tell the people that followed Moses to move on, right? Muhammad came and did the same thing. Now, people have problems with that, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But at the end of the day, Christ never abrogated the laws of Moses. All the 10 commandments that Moses taught still apply in the Christian faith. But he changed the social laws and he gave new spiritual laws. So the analogy in the Bahá'í Faith we use all the time is like going to school, right? Your fourth grade teacher was a great teacher, but you can't say, I want to stay in fourth grade. You got to move on to the next grade. But here's another question. Can the fourth grade teacher teach 10th grade? Absolutely. But who's changed? Not your teacher. It's you. You have progressed. And this concept of progressive revelation, we're going to talk a little bit about coming up. So this aspect that the religions are overwhelmed is not because of the religion, it's because we have advanced and now we need something to help us with that advancement. So I've come to a part of my, when I was in university, I always wanted cliff notes, like what's the one thing that teaches everything? Well, everybody, if you haven't listened to a word I've said, I just want you to memorize this sentence. Religion is religion as science is science. The entire document, which has 13 sections, I told you, it's about 20 some pages. The entire document is in this sentence. If you understand this sentence, you understand the entire document. It's in section 7, paragraph 5. And it's exactly that. It's just one sentence. Religion is religion as science and science. So let's tear this apart a little bit and really figure out what is it saying here and what does it mean. So let's start with as science is science, because if we understand that, we understand the connection to religion is religion. So science is science. Do we ever talk about the unity of science? Does that even make sense? Has anyone proclaimed that? If I came to you and I said, you know what? I love science, but I hate chemistry. So let's take chemistry out of science. You'd say, Shahin, you're crazy. You can't do that. Science is one system. You can't take one thing out of it. I'll say, okay, fair enough. We'll keep chemistry. But you know what? I like French chemistry more than American chemistry. Can we do that at least? Again, it makes no sense. You can't do that. Why? Because science is one system and its only objective is to explain to us the physical reality of humanity. That's it. Science is doing that. And here's another thing, ladies and gentlemen. We don't know it all yet, right? We go to a scientist and say, hey, what's the sun made out of? He'll give you a bunch of PowerPoint slides and he'll give you some very, incredible scientific theories. But then you say, that's wonderful, but I really want to know the essence of the sun. Eventually, the scientist will say, Shahin, we don't know that yet, but time will tell and we'll figure it out. And what does Shahin do? Go, okay, that sounds fair. Okay. With time and experiment and experience, we'll figure it out. Science is one system that actually is explaining our physical reality. Now let's go to the first part of this sentence. Religion is religion as science is science. Well, hang on here. If science is science means it's one system, this implies that religion is one system. Now that's interesting, which means really, why are we talking about religion as one? That should be a no-brainer for all of us, right? That's the whole concept behind this sentence. That if I came to you and I said, you know what? All the religions make sense, but I don't agree. I don't understand Buddhism and Buddha. Let's just take that out. You can't do that. That's like me taking chemistry out. You can't do that. Then, and unfortunately, this has happened, there's denominations of religions, right? There is 2 sects of the Islamic faith that have divided themselves because of how they pray for their obligatory prayer. That's crazy, right? Because Muhammad said you have to say an obligatory prayer 5 times a day. And he said, before you do, you wash your hands. And one sect says, wash your hands from the tip to the elbow. And one other person said, no, that's wrong. You got to wash it from the elbow to the tip. And they divided themselves just on that alone, right? So that's exactly when I said hey, I like French chemistry versus American chemistry. That's what I'm talking about there. You can't do that. You have to look at the faith of Muhammad himself and what he taught and what he brought. So religion is religion as science is science. However, if science is telling us about our physical reality, then what is religion doing for us? Religion is defining and exploring our spiritual reality, right? Science is our physical reality. Religion is our spiritual reality. Now, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Understanding your spiritual reality is a lot harder than science. So that's the challenge, right? Because of what we've done, and the spiritual aspect of humanity is much more important than the physical, right? And there's a beautiful quote in our Baha'i writings that says, science is like the lamp, while religion is the light in the lamp. One without the other makes no sense. If you have a beautiful lamp, but there's no light, useless. You can't even see it when it's dark. But if you have light without a lamp, it has nowhere to show itself. That's why these two have to work together. And that's one of the principles of the Baha'i faith, the harmony of science and religion. So if you want to remember my talk, just remember this: religion is religion as science is science. And I want to end this part with something that my mother said to me, that I promised whenever I get a chance, I'll share with anyone that's willing to listen. My mother unfortunately passed away of leukemia in 2015. And 1 week before she passed away, she said, Shahin, I want to really make sure you remember one thing in your life. And if you can share this, please do. And I said, absolutely, Mom. And this was about a week before she passed away. She said, never, ever forget, son, that we are souls that happen to have bodies, not bodies that have souls. When you think of what my mother says, that changes everything, because our focus should be on our spiritual well-being and our souls, not our physical well-being and what we do. So we are souls that happen to have bodies, not bodies that happen to have souls. So the rest of the document, I'm going to go through very, very quickly. And it's really about Baha'u'llah now talking about the concept of religion. And this part I really wanted to make in a statement. I think we're really asking the wrong question for the greatest challenge of our generation. And we keep asking, what is the role of religion in today's society? That's what people are asking. What is the role of religion in today's society? We should really be asking, what is the role of faith in today's society? Now, some of you will say, Shahin, that's the same darn question. But if you study this document, you realize it is not, because religion has become a set of doctrines, with most of it being man-made. It's interpretation of humanity, while religion's purpose is to unite, and it's doing exactly the opposite. And that's why many people are leaving religion, right? Baha'u'llah himself has said that if a religion divides people, including his own, don't be part of that religion, because that's not the purpose of faith. So there's a whole section talking about the concept of a religion. We talked a little bit about progressive revelation and how we have failed to understand it and accept it. And many of it is because of dogmas and doctrines and fanaticism. To really see religion as one, religion is religion, right? As science is science. So this if we understand progressive revelation, that we as human beings needed it for different times and different periods, we appreciate the concept that religion is one. And that leads to the next part, which is the religion's unity of purpose, which that quote, religion is religion as science, is the core of this section. So we touched on that. And then religion's shaping of civilization. You know, if a religion has changed society, then it has succeeded. But if society starts to become fanatic, that means is a good sign that it's time for another aspect, another spiritual revolution, really. And I'm going to show you some quotes from Baha'u'llah that touches on this aspects of religion's shaping of civilization. And then the enacting of the principles of the new age. Okay, what do we do now? These are some great principles that Baha'u'llah has taught, but has he created the framework to actually enact these principles that he has taught? And in that same document, the Universal House of Justice says yes. And we put the Baha'i community as a whole as an example, as an effort to bring unity. Doesn't mean we're perfect as a Baha'i community, far from it. And we have a lot of issues and a lot of challenges, but we're making an effort to bring these principles into our everyday action. And of course, the unfoldment of the Baha'i global community is part of that. And then there's, does that mean this unity exists? And how do we deal with it? There's a whole section in this document that talks about that. And I just want to say, I personally, and this comes from my belief and from the writings of the faith, evil does not exist. It definitely has ramification, but evil is the absence of good. The analogy we're given is light and darkness. I can't bring darkness to a room. I can only bring light, because darkness is the absence of light, right? So is there evil in the world? Absolutely. But because it's the absence of good. And Baha'u'llah has said, noble have I created thee. And we need to get back to that nobility as human beings. And in like every faith, we will have a day of fulfillment where we'll see these incredible principles come into action like all the other revelations of the past. I will end with my talk, as I promised. There's two quotes I want to share. I want to make sure that we understand that Baha'u'llah says his faith, this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. So it doesn't stop with his faith, like it didn't stop with, people forget, but the Bible used to be called the Good News Bible. Why? Because Christ, the entire purpose was the second coming of Christ. He just talked about that constantly with the disciples. And Moses is the same, Muhammad is the same, and Baha'u'llah is the same. So this concept of faith of God is eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And I want to end with a statement from Baha'u'llah himself that says the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So that is the motto, that is our mission statement, if you could say, for Baha'is around the world, of how do we establish this unity so we can have the peace and security that goes with it. Thank you, everybody. And I want to thank the group that organizes this. This is wonderful. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sobhani. That was really interesting. And thank you for walking us so clearly through such an important document. Now we have time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Our first question is, how can we keep the balance of soul, body, and mind together? And isn't that needed in this world to progress towards all the other worlds of God?
It's an excellent question, and a very important question. And the answer is yes. We need to have that balance between all of them. But I'm gonna go back to what my mother said, that we are souls that happen to have bodies and not bodies that happen to have souls. And the reason I want to restate that comment is that, unfortunately, I think in today's society, we're focusing too much on the physical aspects of our reality and what it means and what we need. I told you the story of the African boy in Togo. He clearly has his priorities right, of focusing on the soul. Does that mean he doesn't go and work in the field? Of course he does. He has to. We all have a burden to fulfill in our everyday lives. But what do we focus on? What is important? What do we prioritize our lives on. And I think that's important. I mean, let's look at ourselves. Not I'm trying to pat ourselves on the back here, but there's 75 people here. It's a Saturday, most people go, what are you doing? Why are you here? Why are you on Zoom? Why are you talking about these topics? Because it's important and it's feeding our spiritual aspects of life. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go watch a good movie tonight and have dinner with your lovely family, but you have to have that balance between all of those things. And unfortunately, I think we are not focusing enough on the spiritual aspects of life.
Thank you. The next question. Hi, Shahin. I'm so happy you're talking about this document and the course. I love the interactive aspect of the course and have tried to get other Baha'is to study and share it. Do you know if it's visited much anymore? And do you know a way to promote it?
Yeah, I just, we started it in 2005, and what I'm just going to do, I'm not going to get into in a big way. It's we can put it on the chat. It's onecommonfaith.net. And this is the entire document. So the document is here, so you could see it. It's also an audio version with Jack Lenz, who actually read it. But I think the part you would like is the course. So there's a whole course that goes behind it. And it's a 2-hour e-learning course on it. And then there's further studies of other documents that match it. And of course, we have glossaries and outlines of the document. So if there's words that you didn't understand, they're all here. So it's a great study. And all I can do is encourage. Everything I've said comes from this document. And I purposely didn't talk in detail about the second half of the document because I hope you'll go and have a chance to experience it yourself.
Thank you. So I guess one question I had is, you talked about the importance of keeping science as science, religion as religion, but why in particular is Baha'u'llah's faith the blueprint for addressing today's problems and as opposed to some other system?
Sometimes when I'm talking, thank you so much for that question. Sometimes when I'm asking, talking about this, some people say, well, Shahin, how do you know this is the one? How do you know we should follow this? They're asking very sincerely. And I say, you know what? I have good news for you. I don't have to answer that question. And this person happened to be Christian. Christ, His Holiness Christ, was asked this question. Right? So let's see what he said. Forget about what I said or anyone else says. Christ was asked, how do we know when you come back? How do we know? Christ gave a beautiful answer. Don't forget, he gave it in analogies because of where they were back then. He said, if the fruit is good, the tree is good. Meaning, if the principles make sense and they have validity in what is needed, there's a good chance that that tree is good. So you should pursue it, and you should do what the Bible says itself, ASK, ask, seek, and knock. You should be constantly in a state of searching. And that's one of the principles of the faith that doesn't end when you decide, hey, I want to be part of this community. And that is independent investigation of truth. You're constantly seeking, you're constantly searching. And of course, you're trying to enact it and put it into your everyday life. So I think when it comes to, if Baha'u'llah's faith makes sense for this day, I think that requires a search, and it's not easy. He is making some incredible statements that require faith. You can't just say, okay, that makes sense, I'll try it for a while. That's not how this is. One of my good friends that decided he wanted to be a Baha'i said, when I realized what Baha'u'llah was teaching, it was me realizing what the law of gravity was. Then you can't deny it anymore. Now you know why when you fell off the second floor building, it was the law of gravity that took hold and brought you down. So there's no denying it. It's like the sun. You could go in the basement, close all the windows and the doors and say the sun doesn't exist. I have good news for you. The sun doesn't care. Because it still exists and it still does its job, right? And it's up to you if you're going to enjoy the sun, right? So this is one of the aspects of learning it. And then I would just end with this. I have a 9-year-old son. I have a 23-year-old daughter. My objective is to make the world a little bit better for them, and they have to do the same. If you have a better system, a better set of laws, and a better way to bring unity into human race, I'll be the first one there to listen and see if it'll make a difference. I believe it's Baha'u'llah. I want you to investigate it for yourself. If it is, great. If it isn't, no problem. But all I'm asking is, do you have an alternative then, if this isn't the one? I need to know that, because I want to roll up my sleeves and go to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next question is, do you think it would be possible to measure spiritual progress in material, philosophical, or logical terms? And if so, how?
Did you say spiritual progress?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a theologian, and I want to make it very clear, which I should have, you know, in the Baha'i Faith, we have no clergy in the Baha'i Faith, right? I'm just one guy that happened to have wonderful parents that taught me about this faith. And I had to choose for myself at the age of 15 if this is what I wanted to be. And my search started at birth. If you knew my father and mother, you'd realize that. And that search has continued to this very day at the age of 55. And I'll continue that search. So when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to theology, I'm not the expert in any shape or form. But you know, when I read the writings of Baha'u'llah, when I read the writings of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, who was his successor, for example, he wrote a book, The Secret of Divine Civilization. Abdul Baha, at the age of 9, went to prison. And basically, till the age of 68, he was a prisoner. And when you read this book, The Secret of Divine Civilization, you're like, whoa, he wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a theologian. He didn't go to any university. Where's this coming from? That's what I think the religious aspect of life brings it. And again, this isn't new. One of the greatest disciples of Christ, Peter. Oh my God, Peter didn't even know how to count. That's why he had 7 fish to figure out what day is the Sabbath. But look who Peter became, one of the greatest disciples of His Holiness Christ. That wasn't because he knew how to fish. That wasn't because he went to university or theology or sat with Caesar and learned something. That was because he understood the revelation of Christ.
Next question is, thank you so much for this really intellectual and exciting talk. I'm from Pakistan and the only Baha'i in my family. How can one begin to make others understand this idea of progressive revelation, specifically in a community who has their own traditions? He just said that he became a Baha'i out of his own personal curiosity and somehow came across books about the Baha'i faith.
Gotcha. You know, that's a very interesting question. And I can just say a few things on that. Baha'u'llah came for unity, and the unity of the family is the most important thing, because it's the beginning of creating unity in a community, unity in a city, unity in a country, and a unity in the world. So the most important thing I could suggest to you is to make sure you maintain that unity within your family. At the same time, it's all about action. You know, Baha'u'llah says, in a tablet called Words of Wisdom, he said, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. Those are a beautiful quote from Baha'u'llah. So it's through your deeds and what you do and how you enact what you believe in your everyday life. And all I can do is speak from people that have gone through the same thing as you. People take notice of that. People realize, hey, our son has changed. He thinks differently. He acts differently. He's doing things differently. And they will question that. And hopefully that will also give them a perspective that you have found yourself.
One more question is, aren't there problems when material progress occurs without spiritual principles, such as the development of great highways that destroy minority communities or destroy the environment, especially in developing countries?
It's a great question that is brought. The answer is yes. I mean, I can stop right there, but that's the whole point of this. Another question that was brought up between the balance of the material and the spiritual, and in the discussion that I had, and One Common Faith goes through this, is that when you have material progress without that moral compass, you have where the world is today, right? Let's talk about our reality today with COVID, right? I think about Omicron. and when it happened. And I thought, and my wife is an infectious disease doctor. She's putting in 12-hour shifts on the topic, right? So it's very real for me in that respect. And I think, why did Omicron happen? Right? And it took one person to get on a plane in London to go to South Africa and go to places in South Africa that the majority of the people were not vaccinated. Those individuals didn't even have a choice, should they be vaccinated or not. And I don't want to get into that discussion of should you or should you, but they just didn't even have a choice. And he gave the virus, or she, I have no idea, to them. And because they were unvaccinated, this thing mutated, gave it to someone that got on a plane and came to London and gave it to everybody. Now, think about that, right? Just think about that for a second. We have, in some parts of the world, we're throwing vaccines away because they've expired. And in other parts of the world, they don't even have access to it, right? If we don't start seeing the world as one, if we had even implemented that simple principle of everyone is one, we would not have Omicron. It's as simple as that. I'm trying to simplify it, and maybe I am. But I really wonder if that would have been the case. And that's something we have to think about. So going to the question, and you know what's funny, is the world's leaders have decided, you know what, we really should vaccinate the world. That's wonderful, great. You've realized that now. But the point I'm trying to make is, if we don't figure it out, there's going to be circumstances in our everyday lives and the world that's going to force us to figure it out. Last analogy I give you. The world is pregnant, and the child that is going to be born is the concept of the unity of the human race. When the world is pregnant, like it or not, it's going to give birth to that concept. And we could go screaming or shouting, or we could have a wonderful birth. That is up to us as humanity. And the world right now, it seems, doesn't want that. Well, we're going to have a lot of labor pains, ladies and gentlemen, because I wholeheartedly believe, I look at my 23-year-old daughter. She can't think of any other way but the unity of the human race. And most of her friends think that way too, right? I remember when she was 12 and the issue of racism came up, and she asked me point blank, Dad, what is racism? So I tried to explain to her. I said, racism is this, this, this. Yeah, Dad, that makes no sense. Why? I explained it again. I go, this. And she point blank looked at me and said, that is stupid. Racism is stupid. And she was 12. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It is stupid. I'm not even going to try to explain it to her anymore. But because it makes no sense. That's the world of the next generation. It reminds me, the older folks will remember, before we had these type of lights we had, remember the fluorescent, not fluorescent, the lights that had the little, what is it called? Films in them, right? If right before that light would go out, it would give its brightest light and then it would go out. Remember? That's how it was. That's the world we live in. Right now, it's trying to give its brightest light, but then it's going to definitely go out, because the generations to come, they only believe and see this concept, but they need a moral compass to understand what it means and how to function with it. But I wholeheartedly believe the world is pregnant. We're in labor pains. The unity of the human race will be born. It's how do we want to interact with it? That's really the bottom line.
Yes, thank you. The next question is, could you please elaborate about the concept of justice and its relation to the world today?
Yeah, it's a very important topic because, you know, someone asked me recently, I was doing a seminar and someone asked me, it was a younger man, he's 19 actually. Yeah, I love these younger folks. They always ask the best question. He said, how do you make decisions, Shahin, in your business life? And I said, well, I make decisions based on my principles, and my principles are based on my faith. So if I believe in my faith, I believe the principles are true and the chances I make the right decisions are there. In all of that, justice plays a part. So when we talk about race, when we talk about the equality, one of the principles of the Baha'i Faith is equality of men and women. That's not lip service that Baha'u'llah gave. And by the way, he proclaimed that in the mid 1800s in backwards countries that didn't even think women had souls, right? So can you imagine the revolutionary statement that he made, and that our job is to implement that statement in the world. And of course, how can you have unity if you don't have the equality of men and women, for example? But when you think about these principles, it's what you do, how you stand up, and how you proclaim and enact it. Every day we have choices, all of us, in our work, and our friends, and in our family. And those choices we make, justice plays a role in it. Are you going to stand up because someone is being attacked or prejudiced against because they're a woman or because they're from another race? Those are the moments in time we have as individuals to stand up, and justice definitely plays a role. So I think if there isn't a moral compass, justice unfortunately gets lost because of interpretation and what people think is justice for themselves.
Thank you. So the next question is, if we see science and religion as concepts, each having their special characteristics and each testing and validating the other, does this idea of different entities validating each other apply in other areas of life?
Between science and religion, Pamela, is how I understood that?
Yeah, and they're just saying, is that concept of two things validating each other apply in other areas of life?
Yeah, good question. I'm not going to have an answer to that, but when I go back to the concept of science and religion, some people say, how can you have harmony in science and religion when even sometimes it looks like there's conflict in between them? And I think the answer, at least for me, when Baha'u'llah teaches that there's harmony between science and religion, or the example I gave you between the light and the lamp, they both still have a role to play in their own systems, right? Faith has a role to play and science has a role to play. I sometimes think we think too much highly of ourselves as human beings, that we know it all. And if it doesn't make sense, someone asked me, well, that principle doesn't make sense. I'm like, okay, there's so many things that don't make sense in life, but doesn't mean it's wrong. Right? So there's a level of humility that we have to have when it comes to these things. And I also think, there's some things many things in the Baha'i Faith you may say, hey, that makes a lot of sense, but I have issues with this, and this. That's okay. It's okay to have issues. It's even okay to have doubt, because then your job is to figure it out. Did you know that, in the Baha'i Faith, we have our own calendar, and there's 19 months and 19 days in each month. I won't go into the full Baha'i calendar, but did you know that one of the months is the month of question? Why do you think that is, right? There's the month of glory, beautiful. Month of loftiness, beautiful. But month of question, wow. Instead of January, it's called question. Why? Because we're encouraged to ask. We're encouraged to figure out and see how it works. So I think when you look at things, if you take an aspect of humility, my first degree was chemistry, then I got an MBA and went into business. But, I remember in chemistry, one of the principles before you did any experiment is you had to suspend doubt before you could do your experiment. Because if you came in with doubt, if you came in with this isn't going to work, then you've already influenced the experiment. You had to leave doubt at the door and go try it out. You have to do that. That same rigor with faith has to happen. So you suspend doubt, all the things you heard and so forth. Doesn't mean you don't believe it. Just leave it aside for a second, just for a second, and see what this is. And then start bringing that stuff in and validating it.
Great. Wow. Thank you. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have. Did you have any final thoughts or anything you wanted to add?
No, I just, again, one person's perspective doesn't matter. anything I've said, I highly suggest you go to Baha'i.org, you read Baha'u'llah's writings himself. Nobody can tell you what they mean. We're not allowed to interpret those beautiful writings for anyone. Go read it yourself, and hopefully this talk and this presentation and this Q&A has inspired you to do that, because that's the most important thing. And I already told you what my mother told me, and I hope you take that to heart.
Thank you so much. This talk definitely inspired me. I know it did for the people who are joining today and who will watch this afterwards. Thank you so much again for offering your time with us.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Take care, everybody. I appreciate your time.
So again, these are every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And if you'd like to be in our mailing list, please fill out the contact form that I put in the chat. And we will end today with a Baha'i song. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Saturday. Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.